Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Hi, we're back, continuing the discussion with Kelley. Lots more fun ahead.
Let me ask you about these names. All right. Steve Francis, Mark Muggleton, Pete Lucas.
Yeah, Mark Muggleton, I think his nickname was Muggsy. Yeah. I just remember him as just an extraordinary, first of all, he had a great personality. I always think of the guys from Boulder. We were definitely differentiated. The Boulder guys and the people, the others. We always said you had to have a visa to go to Boulder.
That's great. They had a little subdivision there too.
Oh my God. I can tell you a number of stories. One was Double R, Rick Rojas, who held the world record, I think, at 15K for a while. He probably held some other records. Great coach today. And his daughter is extraordinary, who happens to be, ironically, I learned way after the fact, is good friends with my daughter, Paige. It's just funny how we interconnect. I decided I'd go to Boulder to run with a couple of the guys. You always feel like maybe you'll get faster if you run with faster people, and it usually worked. Rojas had this one workout called 3-2-1. And he said, "You're going to like this workout." I would literally drive almost an hour to go run with these guys and drive home again. I said, "What is it?" He goes, "We run 3 minutes at what you think is your 10K race pace. Then we jog for 3 minutes." And you did it, and the leader would go to the back, and then the next guy would.
The ladder. Yeah.
And so you'd run easy for 3 minutes, and you'd run hard for 2 minutes at your 5K pace. And then you'd run easy for 2 minutes. Then you'd run 1 minute at your 1 mile pace. And then you run easier for 1 minute, and then back, and you just kept doing this for an hour. It's shot a minute. It's great for the first 30 minutes, but then it gets tough. Another time, I'm reflecting on the Boulder guys with Bernie Allen from Great Britain. He's the one that started the flag shorts, if you remember. There was there was Canadian flag shorts, there were US flag shorts, any country you want. And it was, his company was called International Sports. Incredibly, I was in an ad shot. The first time I ever was in an ad shot where they did a filming photo session, and I was wearing International Sports clothing, and I had really long hair. It was awesome. And I remember who the model was that I was running with. She wasn't a really good runner, but she was very attractive. We're running on Chautauqua Park, I think, but we're running on these trails. There were 2 or 3 guys, and Bernie was leading, and the guy that I was following, maybe 5 feet, 10 feet back, leapt all of a sudden in the middle of the trail. And he said, "Rattlesnake." By the time I'm jumping over a rattlesnake, I'm like, oh my God. I have some very interesting memories of running in Boulder with the guys, but the guys from the Boulder Track Club, what's called the Boulder Running Club, Boulder Track Club, versus the guys from Fort Collins and Denver, they really had a basic conflict. John Sinclair was no fan of the guys in Boulder. He liked to beat them, and he did on a regular basis. It was an interesting time. There were very strong personalities. When you have a Frank Shorter, Herb Lindsay, John Sinclair.
Was Centrowitz part of Boulder? Was he ever over at your place?
No, he wasn't. But yeah, I always think of him because last time I talked to him personally, he was coaching up in Georgetown or somewhere, but I can't quite remember. But he was part of a clinic at Cherry Blossom. He was just one of the funniest guys you'd ever want to meet. But if you heard him and Bill Rogers get into conversations, it was like they're on another planet. They were just hysterical. And then, of course, his son, fabulous athlete. But yeah, the dad, he's a great guy. The point was, There were so many great athletes. I remember Pat Porter. I represented him for a time as an agent, and he didn't associate with the guys from Boulder particularly. It was us against them kind of thing. And he enjoyed beating those guys whenever he could. There was really that atmosphere. It was interesting.
You've had a lot of different contributions and experiences in the sport. We're going to start branching off, but
All right. Yeah.
I just want to go back about your running logs
Yeah.
because you've had the breaks in running, the smoking years, the military years. When did you start logging and how
I
did
started
that?
logging in Atlanta when I started running again. That was when I started. It was funny. There was a president's fitness challenge or something, and they gave you a log sheet or something. So that was my first effort at logging. But eventually, Jeff Galloway started having running logs. So I would use his. I keep looking up because upstairs there's probably 30 or 40 of my logs sitting there. Every once in a while, I'd have friends come over and run with me. And we still do. We'll meet at my house at least once a week. We used to do it 5 or 6 days a week from here. It was hard to reconcile getting slower. And they say, "Did you ever really run fast?" And I say, "Let me go get my log. I'll show you what I did for workouts." It was a defensive mechanism, but it is fun to go back because historically, you forget that you did this training run with these incredible athletes at different times. I got to run with Bruce Fordyce. Bruce Fordyce won Comrades and the greatest road race in the world, I think, in South Africa. I was just so blessed I got to do these things.
That makes me think it's pet project. I would like a running Hall of Fame museum to have a section of bequeathed running logs.
Oh, that's
It's a part of running history.
out in California, a great writer, also an excellent commentator, announcer. Why am I blanking on he and his brother, Finelli? Mike Finelli has in his garage a collection of memorabilia. You want to interview somebody that will just keep you spellbound with what his knowledge base is. He's the guy. I bet he has some training logs. I wouldn't be at all surprised. He certainly is religious about tracking his mileage. He's a great guy. Gary Finelli, his older brother, I represented him for a period of time. He's insane. He's just funniest guy ever. But yeah, he was a character during his running time.
Have you added them up? What's your mileage total if you
I
had to
haven't.
guess?
At one point, I know I was averaging over 40 miles a week for 30 years or something. My running started to volume wise wane definitely after I got stage 4 cancer in 2012. And I was probably in the best shape I'd been in 15 years. At that point, I decided to do double workouts that previous summer. Had no idea I had cancer. I had secretly entered a race in Oklahoma online so that nobody would know me. I would just assume that a small 5K in another city, in another state, I would go unnoticed because the people that do the data entry and everything else wouldn't, unless they by chance knew me. And I didn't announce very much in Oklahoma. So I'd enter this race with a sole goal. I wanted to break 20 minutes for a 5K. And I was 64, 65 years old. And so I trained my tail off all summer long. Then a month before that race, I went for my annual physical. And the doc said, "Man, you're in fabulous shape, but there's just this one anomaly I need to check in your blood." So the next thing I know, I'm going to see another doctor. And the next thing I know, they say, "We need to operate on you in the next 2 weeks because we found cancer and we need to get it out of there." At that point, the cancer had metastasized. They took out a kidney, and so began a revolutionary time in my life for the next 6 months until I was cured. Just before that time, I had said to the doc, look, I'm scheduled for this race. You say the operation has to be on this Friday, but the race is on Saturday. Can we just move the operation to Monday? And he goes, son, you, I know that's important to you, but time is of the essence. You've got stage 4 cancer. And I said, can I still run? He said, oh, yeah. That was on a Friday. So on Thursday morning, nobody knew how serious this was. And so the guys were coming over to do a training run with me. We always ran at 5:30 in the morning. So 5 a.m., I put on my racing flats. I still call them racing flats. Put on my racing shoes, and I ran a mile in my neighborhood to warm up. And when I hit my driveway, I have this 3.23 mile exactly loop in my neighborhood that's hilly, and I ran it as hard as I could. And at the end, the time equated to below 20 minutes for a 5K. Went done. My world imploded after that for a period of time. If I hadn't listened to my, now she's my fiance, but will be my wife. We're getting married in Kenya in February. But I had done this long run, or not that long, 9 miles maybe, in Virginia. I was back there for another function before I went to announce somewhere. And it was hot. And I got back to my hotel room. And when I was going to the bathroom, a speck of blood showed up. And I went, that's odd. But I happened to see it. So I happened to mention it to my soon to be wife. And she said, call your doctor. I said, no, it's nothing. It's just a hard workout. And she said, if you don't call him, I will. And that's why I went in for the physical. And that's why I found out I had cancer. Had I not seen that, you would never have known that I had cancer because I was in awesome shape.
Performance impact. Yeah.
I've said this in talks that I've given since then. Get your checkups, blood work done. Don't think just because you're in awesome shape. I remember right before that operation, my last race that I announced was Quad Cities Marathon, which I'm going to be announcing again in September. Frank Shorter was an invited guest, and I was just the announcer. He and I, this funky relationship for all these years. But he had just survived skin cancer, and pretty serious. And his life story had just finally come out, I think, in Runner's World. Things that I just didn't know about Frank, and my respect for him went way up. Quirky guy, had a hellish upbringing. So we're going through security, and we finished. It's a little airport in Moline. And I said, Frank, can I ask you a question? And he said, sure. I said, I know you just survived cancer. I just found out I have cancer. Do you have any advice for me? He said, here's what I'm going to tell you. It'll be tough, but you're going to get better. So don't worry about it. It'll be fine. And I went, wow, what? So direct and so simple and clear. And I took that to heart. And it was hard. It was very hard, but I was forever grateful. But that's why I tell people, don't assume anything. Get your checkups, do it. I know it seems like nonsense, but do it. It's to your benefit. And most people listen.
You seem like an open, personal guy. Let's just go a little bit just for background for people.
Sure.
People have been lucky enough not to have cancer. What is stage 4 cancer?
That's a funny story because I didn't realize, actually, my doc had not told me that at the time. Just, we're going to have to be aggressive. You're in great shape, so we can use a very aggressive chemo on you. It was an interesting journey. I had to survive the operation first, which was robotic surgery to get out the kidney. Then you have to recover from that before you can have the chemo. And it had been about a month. It was early November. I was determined to keep announcing because that's what we do. I was announcing for a women's race, Donna Stone, DAWNA. She's now the head of world majors, all the major marathons. At the time, she had created this series of women's races, and I was her lead announcer. It was always interesting. I always end up lead announcer for a lot of women's races. I did 100 Danskin women's triathlons for Maggie Sullivan. And so I always had these ironic jobs. And I had gone to this race in St. Petersburg to announce. Didn't feel really great because I had my first round of chemo, but I was insistent that I was going to go announce. I was walking to the starting line, but I was feeling very wretched. I literally was getting physically sick on the way to the start line, walking in the dark. Went over to the medical tent. I put my announcing book down at the announcing stand and said I'd be right back. We hadn't started the event yet. And I went over to the medical tent and I said, "Hey, you have something for me for my upset stomach to calm me down?" And he said, "Are you taking any medication?" And I said, "No, I'm not taking any medication unless you count chemo." He said, "Chemo?"
Yeah, that counts.
Yeah. I literally said that. And he said, "Oh my God, you're dehydrated. You can't be dehydrated." He said, "You're going to the hospital." I said, "I'm not going to the hospital. I got to go announce." He said, "You're going to the hospital." And so off I went to the hospital. I came back from that. They put me in another hospital back here in Denver. Donna Stone insisted I stay at her house to recover, but I said, "No, I'll fly back." This is all weird. It was almost surreal. I was met with a wheelchair. Yeah. When I picked up the plane in Denver, I was so embarrassed by the whole thing. I spent the night at my house and they immediately put me back in the hospital. Eventually, my doc, Alan Cohen, amazing man, I went to see him after I got out of that. I said, "Doc, everybody's asking me what stage cancer I have." And he said, "We're going to get you through this, but you're stage 4." And I said, I thought I might be like stage 2 or something. And he said, "I don't think you understand. There are 5 stages of cancer."
Oh, yeah.
I went, "Oh, wait, what?" And so he said, "You're in such great shape," which is again what I tell people. This is why we stay in shape. You may be slower and older, but you stay in shape because you'll thank your lucky stars because you don't know when tragedy could be around the corner. You need that fitness. It was very serious. In fact, we always had a Christmas party, a winter party around the holidays. We still do, but it's a fundraiser for my charity in Kenya. But at the same time, it's a way to reconnect with friends after a year or so. At this particular time in 2012, everybody came. I had friends from out of town come. I had guys that I'd been training with 15, 20 years before that showed up. And I was a ghost. I've seen pictures. My hair may be white silver now, but it was deathly white. And I was pale, thin. I was back to my running weight in college. Later on, I asked Renee, I said, "God, what is strange. All these people showed up." And she said, "No, they just want to see you." I learned later, they all thought I was dying.
Yeah, they thought it was the last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, last chance.
I said, "I fooled you." But the point was, it humbled me and it made me ever grateful for my running community. You find out who your friends are pretty quick when you're really sick. That either they'll run for cover because they can't face it or they embrace you. It was really a cathartic moment for me, that 5 or 6 months.
Let me ask you one more personal dig into this.
Yeah, sure.
We'll hear the stories of people who had accidents or military war
Yeah, Warren.
incidents that changed their lives, changed their bodies, and some of them will reflect back and say, "Glad it happened."
Yeah.
How do you feel about this now?
I certainly am not glad it happened. I mentioned that I was grateful that I never got wounded in Vietnam. It's by the grace of God and chance that you hear the zip of bullets going by you, but doesn't get you, but gets that guy. Anybody that's going through a life-threatening struggle, the older you get, the more you see around you people one of the co-captains of our cross-country team just died of cancer after a long struggle. A buddy of mine, and we stayed in close touch. He lived up in New Hampshire. I remember telling Renee that I'm going to call him every month. I'm going to stay in touch with him because a lot of people didn't stay in touch with me because they didn't want to face the reality. But I said, I will stay in touch. He said, I can't believe you keep calling me. And I don't have anything really positive to say. I said, hey, well, all we have to do is think back to some of those things we used to do and start laughing about it. And maybe it'll take your mind off this. And he said, if I make it to Christmas, I'll be lucky. He passed in April. But the point is, you've got to embrace life. I've always been at some level irresponsibly, some level in a good way. Carpe diem, seize the day, seize the moment. You don't know what's around the corner. You don't. And do good works. Try to be better today than you were the day before. Your running may suck now. I was telling somebody the other day, I was giving a talk. I said, it is hard for me to reconcile that my training pace now, if you divide by 2, that was my training pace 30 years ago. It's hard for me to reconcile that, but I don't want to give up. I love this sport. I love the idea of it. Like I was telling you this morning, seeing that amazing full moon, if that doesn't pick you up, I don't know what will pick you up. It made me reflect on the incredible things that are going on in the world that, yeah, there are a lot of negative things we read about. And it wasn't more than a footnote, sadly, but that India landed on the south part of the moon, and they're going to discover water there, I'm pretty sure. I just think remarkable. We're part of this amazing humanity that gets to do these amazing things. And so I run slow, gave me a chance to look at the moon a little longer. I don't know.
It's like the Hamilton musical, how wonderful it is to be alive right now. You embody that attitude.
Yeah. And it's important. I tell young people, I tell my grandchildren, I know that you won't care. You can't wait till you grow up, but you're living in a great moment in your life. You just don't know it yet.
I think you've had the opportunity to get that philosophy and attitude out to a lot of people. We have lots more to talk about. Let's go into race announcing.
All right.
Of all the things you've done, where does that one race? As business owner, as athlete?
Way, way up at the top. It was very funny. In 1980, at a cocktail party, it was like a little Christmas party with my neighbors. 2 of these guys that were there, we're talking about my running store. And I said, I got to figure out a way to make more money at this thing. One guy was an attorney. They both worked on the floor of my running store, sold shoes part-time. The lawyer just left a government job, got out of work and needed to make a little bit of money. He soon became vice president of a bank, an amazing success story. But at the time, he's a runner. He said, why don't we form a company and we'll put on races and we'll represent athletes? And I went, what? And he said, yeah, we know all these people. You've already put on a couple of races. You figured it out. And I said, okay. So we did. For $50, we incorporated a company called BKB Limited, Bush, Kelley, and Buckius Limited. So we decided we would put on races and I would announce those races. We would bring in the athletes that we formerly now had made contracts with. He went to the library, found an NBA contract and reworded it, typed it out back then, not a computer, just typed it out, changed the language slightly. And that became our contract basis for signing distance runners. I think John Sinclair was the first one we signed. Jeff Galloway found me Anne O'Dane, this New Zealander nobody had ever heard of. Lorraine Moeller, so many others. But the point was, we have this basis for being agents for athletes. At that time, there was IMG. I don't think Bob Wood had become an agent yet. There was a handful of people that would represent distance runners, and I was one of them. At the same time, we would then represent me as an announcer, but I really didn't have any reputation. So I was announcing for free in Colorado. Then I got my athletes into Bloomsday, great race in Spokane, Washington. And so I went, Don Cardon, I'd met him. By this time, I'd started getting involved with the Athletics Congress, now USA Track and Field. It's a whole nother story, but it all happened converging within 2 or 3 years. I was doing all these things. I went to this race at Bloomsday, and Sinclair and O'Dane, both of them, won the race, men's and women's. Well, I was ecstatic because that meant I made like $1,000 because of that, because I was getting 10%. And they were ecstatic because they both won at least $5,000 each. I talked to them both briefly, and then they went to warm down. I said, "Don't forget, there's an award ceremony. You got to be back for that." And they said, "Absolutely," which is another note that I'm disappointed how few athletes at local races stick around for the award ceremonies. It's really tragic. Back then, it was so important. Now they're ambivalent. So Cardon comes up to me and he said, "I need John and Ann." And I said, "For what?" I said, "A TV interview." I said, "They're warming down, running 2 or 3 miles to warm down." He said, "But TV's live. They need them now." I said, "I don't know what to tell you." He said, "Did you talk to them about their races?" And I said, "Of course I did." And he said, "Come with me. You're going on the TV show." I went, "Wait, what?" So I did. And they asked me questions about John and Ann. Of course, I was excited because my athletes had won. I was interested, but I knew every detail because it's really easy to debrief an athlete. I don't care if the race is a marathon or 7 miles. They can tell you what happened and how quickly it happened and when the moments were. So I did this, and we finished up the interview. "Thanks very much, Creigh." And I started to walk away, and they say, "Hey, can you come back here for a second?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "We'd like to get you back on the show next year." I said, "I have no idea what I'm doing next year or if my athletes are coming." And they said, "No, we'd like you to do commentary for the TV show next year." And I said, I don't know where I'm going to be." They said, "I don't think you understand. We'd like to hire you, fly you in and pay you." I said, "Where will I stay?" "We'll put you up in a hotel." I had no idea that world existed. I said, "Of course I will." That was the first time anybody had shown notice of me outside the confines of Colorado. And that launched, I did the TV show for them for at least 15 years, I think. And because I did that, we were able to build on that with cable TV eventually for track and field for 15 years and just many other fun things. Doing the radio broadcast with Tony Revis for the World Cross Country Championships in Boston back in, I'm going to say 90 or 82 or 88, 92, somewhere in there. I got to do so many cool things, but it was only because of that moment. Had my athletes not been at that race, I wouldn't have been at that race. Had they not won, I wouldn't have been asked. Had that, you go, "Oh my gosh." So
Yeah, if they were standing right there, they might not have asked you. Yeah.
they wouldn't have asked. Of course they wouldn't have. I wouldn't have been available to do it. It wouldn't be part of what I do. So at the top of the heap was getting in front of thousands of people on a microphone was just the cat's meow. That was just the best ever. And I was really at home. The military had prepared me for it. Being selected as captain of a team prepared me for getting in front of my career. It all pointed toward that as you look back, but at the time it didn't make any sense of it. Then I was so interested in the elite component because that's where my interest lay. I stopped being an agent probably around 88. For people kept asking me, but I kept turning them down. You don't realize sometimes things that are happening. Always for years, I've called them God winks. Things that happen, crossroads. Everybody in their life can go back in life, and you see these moments that happen that point you forward in a different direction, but they all make sense after the fact. At the time, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but definitely Bloomsday changed my life forever that way. Then being fortunate enough to have Ann O'Dane and John Sinclair as two of my principal athletes. What if they hadn't been that good? It was very funny. BKB had offices, quote unquote, back then. There wasn't the internet. So all you had to do is put on letterhead. You had an office in London, an office in Orlando, an office in Miami, an office in Boston. And I did. I had representatives. Who's my representative in England that was my agent of record? He was an 84 Olympian marathoner for Great Britain. Oh, the name makes me remember this race that I put on. Anyway, and I had an office in Toronto. That was David Edge and Carrie May, because I represented him as an athlete. And I said, you can just be my agent of record. So my masthead on my stationery looked awesome. What's his name? 84 Marathon Olympic team, Great Britain. Coe was on that team. Charlie Spedding. That's who it was. Charlie Spedding. So very funny. I was trying to make myself look as big as IMG, but nobody could fact check it. The phone numbers, if they called the number, it would be John Hughes in Orlando. It would be Walt Disney World race director, Track Shack. It would be Basil Honigman down in Miami. It was David Edge in Toronto. So it was all real, but principally it was pretty fabricated. I don't know why. The Mexican government in the spring of 84 got in touch with me through a friend who said, I understand you put on races. I think they're called Sectur at the time, SECTUR. But that was the national promotional agency for the government of Mexico. They said, we want to put on a race in Ixtapa, Zihuatanejo. First of all, I don't speak Spanish. Secondly, I didn't even know where that was. I had to look it up. I said, of course I can do that. We want to have a top field and we want to do all this. I said, no problem. I can do this. And we did. We put on this race. It had 1,000 runners. And the world-class athletes that were there, Charlie Spedding, John Sinclair, Ann O'Dane. It was a world-class field of former Olympians. We had so much fun. Plus, I was making money as an announcer, as the race director, as an agent. It was the Wild West, man. It was
This
just,
is before the antitrust laws of taking over a business.
I'm thinking about one other thing. I called Fred up. It was about 2 weeks before the New York City Marathon. I represented an athlete, tall, thin guy out of Boulder named Kurt. He was really almost a flash in the pan. He was one of the winners back in the late 80s, I believe. Kurt,
Russer?
no. Anyway, point is, I called up Fred and I said, I've got an athlete for you. I want you to bring him in. He said, our field's filled. I said, yeah, but Fred, this guy's going to win your race. He said, I hear that all the time. I got Bill Rogers. I'm good. I'm good on the field. I said, I'm telling you, this guy will win your race. And he said, all right, I'll bring him in. I'll give him a hotel room, but he doesn't get an appearance fee. I said, that's okay, because he'll win the prize money. He said, Creigh, this is a one-time only deal, because if this guy isn't any good, Kurt, we go to the race. I went to, and Kurt wins the race. And I'm waiting around for the award ceremony, which is later in the afternoon, early evening. And there's Kurt wandering around the hallway, and there's nobody around him. I said, man, you won today. You should be celebrating. So I said, I don't know, the award ceremony. And I said, after the award ceremony, you want to go to a party? He goes, I guess so. He comes out of the award ceremony and we walk down to the Marriott. I knew from here a guy named Mickey Miller and Carl, who was the vice president of Denver Nuggets. They were running buddies and they'd run in the race. In fact, I'd gotten a ride to near the start in Mickey's limo. We go to the Marriott, we go up to the top floor because I knew, he said, come up to the party, and there's guards at the door because Mickey Miller was one of the major owners of Marriott. So I go, we're invited, and we, two skinny guys, not dressed appropriately for a party,
Pfeffer.
like Kirk Pfeffer.
Kurt Pfeffer. Yeah. I know, yeah.
Where's
Huh.
he won the Enschede Marathon? There we go.
79. Bill Rogers passed him in 79.
Pfeffer led the field till 20. Then he was passed by Bill Rogers. Held
Yeah.
on for second. All right, so he took second. My memory's a little vague. That was in 79.
Yeah. Kirk Pfeffer.
79. But that I got him in the race 2 weeks prior, and I said he's going to win the race, so he was second. So I go up to this party. That's okay. That's 40 some years ago. And we go up to the party. They won't let us in. I yell through the crowd, "Is Carl or Mickey here?" And then they see me. They said, "Let those guys in." And I said, "This guy just took second at New York." And they all had run the race. I was an afterthought after that. He was like the king of the party. Everybody wanted to shake his hand and get his autograph and everything else.
There's so much more to come from my discussions with Creigh Kelley. I hope you'll come back for episodes 3 and 4 in the coming weeks. I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.